Perhaps the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon isn't extraterrestrial or interdimensional, but us from the future. Maybe this so-called non-human intelligence at the center of the UAP mystery isn't non-human at all, and investigators have been barking up the wrong tree for the past 80-odd years. If faster-than-light travel proves impossible and life truly is rare across the galaxy, then perhaps the anomalous UAP reported over the decades are simply time machines piloted by future versions of ourselves, returning to an era when we were still Homo sapiens. Hello everyone, and welcome to UAP as NHI. In part 2 of the Origins miniseries, I explore the main elements of the Extratempestrial Model, or ETM. While some refer to it as the extratempestrial hypothesis, I'll stick with model here to avoid confusion with the more widely known ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The ETM posits that the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon does not originate from a distant star system, an alternate dimension, or a parallel evolutionary path on Earth. Instead, it suggests these are time-traveling humans from our own distant future, visiting the past for various possible reasons: to study their evolutionary origins, to retrieve genetic material needed to restore or diversify a weakened gene pool, or to influence events in the past in order to secure a more favorable future. One such intervention might be to prevent a nuclear holocaust, an existential threat that could wipe out humanity before their civilization ever emerges. Their presence, in that case, would be part of a self-fulfilling causal loop, a future humanity returning to its own past to prevent its own non-existence. The spike in UAP sightings following the advent of nuclear weapons might support this model. If there is a direct correlation, it could challenge the ETH. After all, the time it would take for the electromagnetic signals or radiation signatures from Earth's nuclear detonations to reach a distant alien civilization, let alone for them to respond, would be measured in decades, centuries, or millennia. That's far too slow to account for the rapid appearance of UAP activity after 1945. However, some argue that a sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial civilization might not be constrained by such limitations. If they could sidestep the constraints of time or space, or detect our nuclear activities through a process like quantum non-locality, then their presence could still be consistent with the ETH. But if such capabilities aren't feasible, and if the timing of UAP activity aligns too precisely with our nuclear era, then the ETH becomes harder to defend. This back and forth debate is central to the ETH, but it doesn't affect models like the interdimensional or cryptoterrestrial hypotheses, since those propose that the intelligence in question is already present on or near Earth, and not separated by light years of space. In part 1 of the NHI Origins miniseries, I explored the cryptoterrestrial and ultraterrestrial hypotheses, CTH and UTH respectively. I also wrote a detailed academic-style paper on the subject, available on my website at uapasnhi.com. Because of the complexity and scope of that material, I divided it into 2 separate episodes. This installment, by contrast, will be considerably shorter, as the ETM is grounded in a more focused idea: the feasibility of time travel. Much of the supporting evidence and argumentation for the ETM can be found in Dr. Michael Masters' first 2 books, where he lays out the model in detail. Still, in this episode, I'll highlight the core ideas and key arguments that help make the ETM a compelling alternative to more traditional origin theories. If you've come across the work of Dr. Michael Masters or heard about the theory that UFOs might actually be future humans rather than extraterrestrials, you may be wondering, what exactly has he written on the subject and where can you learn more? Dr. Masters has developed a thoughtful, multidisciplinary, and accessible body of work exploring the idea that many of the so-called aliens reported in UAP encounters may in fact be future versions of ourselves. His first book, Identified Flying Objects, 2019, formally introduced what he terms the extratempestrial model to the public. The full title, Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon, reflects the scope of Masters' analysis. In it, he makes a compelling case that the archetypal gray beings described in abduction reports bear a striking resemblance to what humans might plausibly evolve into over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. Drawing from anthropology, evolutionary biology, and physics, Masters argues that these beings are not extraterrestrial, but extratempestrial, originating not from a distant planet, but from a future epoch of human history. The book is rigorous, evidence-informed, and designed to open an academic dialogue about the possibility of time-traveling humans as a serious alternative to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It establishes the foundational framework for the ETM and sets the stage for Masters' later work. In 2022, Masters published a follow-up volume, The Extratempestrial Model, which delves deeper into the hypothesis now that the theoretical groundwork had been established. The second book takes a closer look at contactee and abductee reports through the lens of time travel, employing abductive reasoning to evaluate which explanation best fits the observed patterns. Rather than assuming the entities in question are alien, Masters asks a different question: what if they are us? Then, in 2023, Masters took a creative turn with Revelation, the Future Human Past, a satirical science fiction novel that builds on his academic work. Though fictional, the book offers a speculative vision of how extratempestrials might interact with their ancestors and the ethical and existential dilemmas such encounters could entail. It serves as a narrative thought experiment, using fiction to further explore themes introduced in his earlier books. Taken together, these three works offer a comprehensive perspective, from scientific analysis to speculative storytelling, on the idea that UAP-related entities might be our own distant descendants. But was Dr. Masters the first to propose that these beings could be time-traveling humans? And did he coin the term extratempestrial? The short answer is no, but he has done more than anyone to bring the concept into serious academic consideration. Masters, a biological anthropologist, did coin the term extratempestrial by blending extraterrestrial with temporal to describe a lineage of future humans who return to their own evolutionary past. In his formulation, these visitors may be anthropologists, geneticists, or historians studying earlier stages of human development, or intervening to safeguard their own future existence. While the terminology appears to be original to Masters, the underlying idea has been suggested by others in earlier decades. Jacques Vallée, one of the most respected researchers in the field, proposed in the 1970s that the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon might not be extraterrestrial at all, but something more complex, possibly interdimensional or temporally dislocated. Though Vallée did not frame it specifically as time travel, he helped open the conceptual space in which the ETM could later emerge. Similarly, John Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecies, proposed in Operation Trojan Horse that UFOs and their occupants might represent a kind of interdimensional or trickster phenomenon, potentially existing outside our conventional understanding of space and time. He too gestured toward a broader interpretation of the phenomenon beyond the ETH. More speculative thinkers, such as Bruce Goldberg in the 1980s and 90s, openly discussed chrononauts, time travelers from the future linked to UFO sightings. While Goldberg's work lacked scientific grounding and was largely fringe in nature, the conceptual similarity to the ETM is notable. In the world of science fiction, authors like Arthur C. Clarke explored the idea that humanity might evolve into more advanced or unfamiliar forms and later return to interact with earlier humans. Though fictional, such works have subtly shaped public perception and paved the way for more serious treatment of the subject in academic contexts. Even proponents of ancient astronaut theories in the 1970s and 80s occasionally suggested that the gods or sky beings described in historical accounts might not have been extraterrestrial, but advanced humans from the future who traveled back in time to influence or simply observe past civilizations. In short, while the core idea has been circulating for decades in various forms, Dr. Michael Masters has provided it with a scientific structure, a formal vocabulary, and a place in serious academic discourse. His work has helped elevate the ETM from fringe speculation to a legitimate theoretical contender in the broader conversation about UAP origins. While Dr. Masters did not originate the idea that UFOs might be time-traveling humans, his unique contribution lies in framing the hypothesis through a serious, multidisciplinary scientific lens. As a biological anthropologist, Masters applies evolutionary theory to the recurring anatomical features described in encounters with so-called gray aliens, noting their enlarged craniums, reduced jaws, prominent eyes, and slight gracile bodies. These traits, he argues, could represent the natural trajectory of human evolution, particularly if future humans adapt to low-light environments, rely increasingly on technology, and eventually abandon spoken language in favor of neural or telepathic communication. Rather than proposing that these entities come from a distant solar system, Masters raises the possibility that witnesses are observing time-traveling humans, returning from a distant future for purposes of research, exploration, or cultural preservation. In this framing, the visitors are not extraterrestrials, but extratempestrial. In short, while Masters was not the first to suggest that UFOs might represent time travelers, he does appear to be the first to coin the term extratempestrial model and present it in a scholarly context. Today, he remains one of the most prominent figures advancing this idea within academic and scientific discourse. What makes Masters' work particularly significant is its ability to bridge the gap between speculative inquiry and scientific reasoning. By doing so, he offers a compelling alternative to more conventional interpretations of the UAP phenomenon. What if these visitors are not alien beings from distant stars, but our own descendants returning from another time? Both of Masters' nonfiction books present this argument with careful reasoning and scholarly discipline. At the heart of his hypothesis is the idea that the beings most commonly associated with UAP encounters may be future Homo sapiens who have developed time travel technology and now return to observe their evolutionary past, much as we study our ancient ancestors through archaeology and paleontology. In Identified Flying Objects, Masters outlines several key pillars that support the ETM. One of the strongest is the consistent morphological description of entities across decades and cultures. Witnesses frequently describe beings that are large-brained, hairless, bipedal, and possess disproportionately large eyes, small noses, and minimal mouths. Masters interprets these descriptions as non-random, arguing that they align with known evolutionary trends such as neoteny, cranial expansion, and reduced facial projection, all features seen in the trajectory of hominin development. Another core element is the biocultural continuity between the reported beings and human society. Many accounts involve entities who not only communicate in recognizable human languages, but also demonstrate an understanding of human behavior and operate craft that, while technologically advanced, appear to function on comprehensible principles, featuring observable propulsion systems, instrumentation, and communication mechanisms. This technological familiarity, Masters contends, supports the idea that these beings are evolved humans rather than wholly alien life forms. He also highlights what he refers to as time-related effects frequently reported in UAP encounters. These include altered perceptions of time, periods of missing time, and sensations of temporal dislocation. Rather than dismissing these accounts as psychological anomalies, Masters proposes that they may represent experiential evidence of time travel, manifestations of relativistic or temporal distortions caused by advanced temporal mechanics. Underlying all of this is an abductive approach to reasoning. Masters does not claim that any single case proves his hypothesis. Instead, he examines the collective weight of consistent patterns across hundreds of reports. He argues that, given the morphological behavior and temporal consistencies, the simplest explanation may be that these beings are us, rather than unrelated extraterrestrials, interdimensional entities, or mythological constructs. From this perspective, the ETM satisfies the principle of Occam's razor. It introduces fewer assumptions while accounting for more of the data. In his second book, The Extratempestrial Model, Masters further refines this framework by analyzing a curated selection of high-quality, well-documented case studies. He is careful to note that no single hypothesis can account for every UAP report, but he zeroes in on a subset of encounters that appear to exhibit strong thematic and morphological coherence. These include beings with human-like features, fluent communication abilities, and craft capable of rapid acceleration, direction changes, and apparent manipulation of gravity or inertia, all recurring motifs in the literature. Particularly notable in this second volume is the emphasis on temporal anomalies. Masters treats witness accounts of missing time, temporal distortion, and experiential disorientation not as anomalies to be dismissed, but as potential signatures of time travel technology, what he calls temporal footprints. He suggests these may be subtle but telling indicators of an advanced future civilization operating outside our normal time constraints. In addition, Masters continues to emphasize the evolutionary plausibility of the beings themselves. The anatomical profiles reported in abduction accounts, hairlessness, enlarged brains, slender physiques, are evaluated within the context of known hominin trends. He argues that such features would be expected outcomes if current evolutionary pressures persist into the far future. Importantly, Masters also addresses a critical limitation of his hypothesis, the lack of hard physical evidence. He acknowledges that there are no recovered craft, biological specimens, or definitive material proof. However, he maintains that the ETM still represents the most parsimonious explanation for a wide range of consistent experiential data. It is, in his view, a best fit hypothesis, one that integrates anthropology, evolutionary biology, and temporal theory to interpret the phenomenon in a coherent and scientifically grounded way. CTM versus ETM, competing models or complementary theories. In addition to his work on the extratempestrial model, Dr. Masters also co-authored a paper titled The Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis alongside Tim Lomas and Brendan Case. In this work, the authors explore a strikingly different possibility, that the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon may not originate from the future or from outer space, but from here on Earth. CTH proposes that a hidden non-human lineage of intelligent beings may have evolved long before Homo sapiens and successfully retreated into concealed environments, such as subterranean domains, deep oceans, or even undiscovered ecological niches. Unlike the ETM, this model does not require the development of time travel, only a sufficient span of time for a parallel evolutionary path to unfold in secrecy. There is notable conceptual overlap between the ETM and the CTH, particularly when considering the consistent physical descriptions of the beings reported in abduction and close encounter cases. Across both models, we find a recurring archetype: humanoid figures with enlarged craniums, large eyes, reduced jaws, and slender bodies. This morphological consistency raises a fundamental question. Are these entities a glimpse of what we might become in the future, or are they a reflection of what another species became long before us, notwithstanding one that may have branched from our own evolutionary line? This shared imagery naturally leads to an important inquiry. If Masters contributed to the development of the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, why does he continue to favor the extratempestrial model as the more likely explanation? After all, from a strictly parsimonious standpoint, the CTH may seem more in line with Occam's razor. It avoids appeals to exotic physics like time travel and instead posits a forgotten or overlooked evolutionary branch, one that developed intelligence, adapted to Earth's challenges, and managed to remain hidden. It requires no temporal paradoxes, only the possibility of lost history and ecological concealment. Yet, as one examines Masters' public lectures and written works, it becomes clear why he leans toward the ETM. As a biological anthropologist, Masters places considerable weight on the anatomical similarities between reported beings and projected trends in human evolution. To him, the match appears too precise, too anthropomorphic to represent a wholly separate species. The morphology described in abduction cases seems to align more naturally with a continuation of our evolutionary lineage than with that of an unknown parallel branch. However, one might argue that this distinction is not as sharp as it seems. As discussed in Part 1 of this mini-series, several cryptoterrestrial models posit a divergence from the Homo lineage deep in the past, resulting in a species that evolved underground and developed traits such as pale skin, large eyes, and reduced facial features. These traits, though developed in the past, parallel the features one might expect in a future human adapted to low light and closed environments. In that sense, the ETM and CTH may not be mutually exclusive, but rather different interpretations of similar evolutionary outcomes shaped by analogous environmental pressures. Ultimately, while the CTH offers a grounded, naturalistic explanation, the ETM provides a more speculative, but arguably more elegant narrative, that the beings we encounter are not simply hidden co-inhabitants of Earth, but descendants of our own species, returning across time. For Masters, this may be the key appeal of the model, not only its scientific coherence, but its personal resonance. These are not just visitors, they are us. Or at least they could be. This implication introduces a profound philosophical dimension to the UAP mystery, the idea that we are being studied not by alien minds, but by future minds shaped by our own actions, decisions, and evolutionary trajectory. Importantly, these models need not be viewed as competing or exclusionary. It is entirely possible that multiple explanations are simultaneously valid. Some entities may be ancient Earth evolved intelligences, as suggested by the CTH. Others could be time-traveling future humans, consistent with the ETM. Still others may indeed be extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or manifestations of an even more elusive reality. We simply do not yet know. What becomes increasingly clear, however, is that the phenomenon likely defies simple categorization. If anything, the truth may be more complex and stranger than any one hypothesis alone can capture. Yet in Masters' case, his preference for the extratempestrial model seems rooted in one core observation. The beings described in countless reports behave, communicate, and look like us. If we follow that line of reasoning, then time travel, while extraordinary, is simply the mechanism. The real insight lies beyond the method of arrival. It lies in the possibility that what we are witnessing is not alien intelligence, but ancestral continuity. The UAP phenomenon, viewed through this lens, becomes not a story about contact with the other, but contact with ourselves. Time travel. Is the extratempestrial mechanism plausible? If we are to seriously consider the ETM, we must address the foundational question: is time travel even possible? And if so, what might that actually entail? Time travel has long been the subject of speculation, not only in science fiction, but also within the realm of theoretical physics. Depending on whom you ask, the concept is either a scientific possibility worthy of exploration, or a physical impossibility undermined by paradoxes and limitations. Let us begin with the case in favor of time travel, because as implausible as it may sound at first, the theoretical support is stronger than many realize. The earliest scientific foundation for time travel emerged from Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity, 1905, and later general relativity, 1915. These theories established that time is not a fixed constant, but instead can stretch or compress depending on one's relative motion or proximity to a massive object. This phenomenon, known as time dilation, has been experimentally confirmed. For instance, astronauts aboard the International Space Station age fractionally slower than people on Earth, a real-world demonstration of time travel into the future, albeit on a minuscule scale. In 1949, mathematician Kurt Gödel, Einstein's colleague and friend, extended this framework by identifying a solution to the equations of general relativity that allowed for a rotating universe. In such a universe, so-called closed time-like curves would theoretically allow an object to loop through time and return to its own past. This mathematical model introduced the idea that time loops, under certain cosmological conditions, might be possible. Building on this foundation, Nobel laureate Kip Thorne and his colleagues in the 1980s and 1990s explored whether wormholes, hypothetical tunnels through space-time, could be used for time travel. Their research suggested that if wormholes could be stabilized using exotic matter, a substance with negative energy density, they might permit movement not just across space, but across time. Though entirely theoretical, these ideas are based on the known laws of physics. Thorne even advised on Christopher Nolan's film Interstellar, where these concepts play a central narrative role. More recently, physicist Ronald Mallett has proposed a practical design for a time machine using circulating laser beams to twist space-time into a loop. While no such device has yet been built, Mallett's model is rooted in general relativity and represents a sincere effort to bring time travel closer to empirical science. Taken together, these contributions suggest that time travel is not purely speculative. For proponents of the ETM, this theoretical groundwork provides a credible scientific backdrop. If time is relative, and if space can bend, then it stands to reason that time, as a dimension intertwined with space, may also be manipulated under the right conditions. However, no discussion of time travel is complete without considering the formidable objections proposed by its critics. The most significant philosophical and physical challenge is causality, the principle that cause must precede effect. The so-called grandfather paradox, in which a time traveler alters the past in a way that prevents their own existence, highlights the contradictions inherent in backward time travel. Stephen Hawking famously addressed this issue by proposing the chronology protection conjecture, suggesting that the laws of physics conspire to prevent such violations of causality. Hawking even conducted a playful experiment to illustrate his skepticism. He hosted a party for time travelers, but only sent out the invitations after the event had occurred. Unsurprisingly, no one arrived. His conclusion? If time travel to the past were possible, we would already have evidence of it. Of course, as advocates of the ETM might point out, such evidence may already exist. If, for example, time travelers are manifesting as UAP and deliberately concealing their identities. Another major obstacle is the question of energy. Theoretical constructs like wormholes or closed time-like curves would require staggering amounts of energy, perhaps more than the total output of a star, to stabilize. As physicist Sean Carroll notes, while general relativity permits time loops in theory, no one has yet demonstrated a method for creating them within the physical constraints of our universe. There is a gap, in other words, between mathematical possibility and engineering feasibility. Skeptics also point to the absence of direct evidence. There are no confirmed sightings of time travelers, no recovered technologies bearing unmistakable marks of future origin, and no empirical signals from the future. If time travel is eventually developed, and if it is as transformative as the ETM suggests, why is the evidence not more obvious? And yet, this is precisely the tension that lies at the heart of the ETM. On one hand, we have the theoretical scaffolding, relativity, time dilation, wormholes, exotic matter, that suggests time travel is at least conceivable. On the other, we face serious philosophical and practical barriers that suggest it may never be realized. Dr. Masters' argument is fundamentally anthropological. The entities described in abduction reports look too much like us to be entirely alien. They exhibit evolutionary traits consistent with a plausible future version of Homo sapiens. If that conclusion is to be accepted, time travel must be the mechanism. It is a bold claim, and it hinges on accepting that the theoretical pathways toward time manipulation will eventually become technologically viable. As history has shown, what seems impossible in one century may become commonplace in the next. 100 years ago, the notion of bending time was unimaginable. Today, it is a feature of our most successful physical theories. Whether time travel can be mastered remains to be seen, but it cannot be dismissed out of hand. Perhaps the time travelers are already here, observing, studying, and preserving. Or perhaps the very reason we don't see them for what they are is because they are exceptionally good at hiding or distorting. In either case, the ETM invites us to consider a profound possibility, that some of the mysterious visitors in our skies are not foreign invaders, but future historians, anthropologists, or custodians returning home. Rethinking time, from paradox to possibility. Dr. Masters does not attempt to redefine the fundamental nature of time itself. Rather, his focus lies in exploring what might be possible within the frameworks already suggested by modern physics. And this is where the ETM intersects with some of the most profound and often counterintuitive ideas in contemporary science and philosophy. One particularly relevant perspective comes from physicist Julian Barbour, who challenges the conventional notion that time flows from past to future. In Barbour's model, reality consists of a vast collection of discrete, timeless moments, what he calls nows. Each now is a unique configuration of the universe, and all of them exist simultaneously. There is no intrinsic direction to time, no moving present, only a cosmic archive of static, fully formed snapshots. This interpretation has striking implications for the concept of time travel. If all possible moments in time already exist, then moving from one moment to another may not involve violating causality or altering the past. Instead, it may simply be a matter of navigating between fixed configurations. In this framework, time travel is not the manipulation of a flowing timeline, but rather a shift in position across a pre-existing landscape of temporal states. This view aligns well with the Novikov self-consistency principle, which Masters has cited in relation to his extratempestrial model. Novikov's principle posits that time travel to the past is permissible, but only if it does not result in logical contradictions. In essence, if a traveler journeys to the past, their actions must already be part of that history. Any attempt to alter the timeline in a way that creates paradoxes would be inherently self-correcting or prohibited by the structure of physical law. When Barbour's model of discrete nows is paired with Novikov's self-consistency, the result is a coherent and paradox-free model of time travel. There is no need to imagine a fragile chain of causation susceptible to disruption. Instead, one envisions a static, self-consistent universe in which all events, past, present, and future, are already embedded. A closely related concept is the block universe model, also known in philosophical terms as eternalism. Rooted in Einstein's theory of relativity, this model treats time as a fourth dimension, no different in kind from the three dimensions of space. In a block universe, the entire timeline, past, present, and future, exists all at once. Time does not pass, it simply is. Much like a film strip that contains every frame of a movie, the block universe contains every event in space-time simultaneously. We only perceive a progression because our consciousness moves sequentially through those frames. If the block universe is accurate, then time travel would not involve altering the past or forging a new future. Instead, it would mean traversing the existing structure of space-time. All actions, including those of time travelers, are already accounted for in the fabric of reality. Again, the Novikov principle fits neatly into this model, reinforcing the idea that paradoxes are impossible, not because they are prohibited by external forces, but because they are structurally incoherent within the nature of time itself. Barber's timeless model and the block universe differ in how they conceptualize the nature of time's existence, discrete moments versus a continuous four-dimensional space-time, but both suggest that the familiar arrow of time is not a fundamental feature of the universe. Rather, it may be a perceptual artifact, a psychological illusion rooted in entropy and memory. Physicist Carlo Rovelli offers a complementary view through his work on loop quantum gravity and his philosophical treatise, The Order of Time. Rovelli argues that time is not fundamental to the universe, but emergent. That is, time arises from the interactions and relationships between physical systems. It is not a background structure through which events unfold. There is no universal now, no objective flow of time, only localized temporal experiences shaped by relative motion and entropy. This view further weakens the standard objections to time travel. If there is no absolute temporal order, then the notion of before and after becomes contextual rather than universal. In such a model, causality may still exist, but its rigidity is softened. The conceptual space in which time travel becomes plausible expands accordingly. Philosopher Hugh Price adds another layer to this discussion through his advocacy for time-symmetric physics. Most fundamental physical laws are time reversible. They work equally well forward or backward. Price argues that our sense of time's direction is rooted not in the laws themselves, but in psychological and thermodynamic asymmetries. He further explores the idea of retrocausality, the possibility that effects might precede causes under certain quantum conditions. If valid, this challenges the very foundation of temporal linearity and opens the door to time travel as a legitimate feature of physical reality. Finally, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics offers another potential resolution to time travel paradoxes. In this view, every quantum event spawns a new branch of reality. If a time traveler were to interact with the past, they would not be altering their own history, but entering a parallel timeline. This circumvents the grandfather paradox entirely. The original timeline remains untouched, while the traveler's actions unfold in a new branching universe. Taken together, these theories, Barber's timeless nows, the block universe, Rovelli's relational time, Price's retrocausality, and the many worlds interpretation, offer a diverse set of models in which time travel may be conceptually possible without violating physical law. More importantly, they offer viable frameworks for interpreting the ETM as not just speculative fiction, but as a hypothesis grounded in evolving understandings of time and causality. In this context, the idea of future humans returning to study their ancestors becomes not only plausible, but scientifically coherent. These visitors would not be disruptive anomalies, but components of a vast interconnected reality, one in which their presence was always part of the structure. Their appearances in our present might represent movements not across space, but across moments, between nows, between coordinates in a block universe, or across quantum branches of a multiverse. Thus, what once seemed like a fantastical premise, the idea that UAP are operated by future versions of ourselves, begins to take on the weight of possibility. Time travel, viewed through this lens, becomes not an act of temporal transgression, but an advanced form of navigation through a timeless or eternally structured cosmos. Human evolution, projecting 300,000 years into the future. Speculating on what humanity might look like 300,000 years from now is a deeply imaginative exercise, but one grounded in real scientific principles. Evolution does not cease simply because we've built cities or advanced technologies. It continues, shaped by environmental pressures, cultural shifts, and increasingly our own deliberate interventions. If Homo sapiens survive that far into the future, it is almost certain that we will have diverged significantly, biologically, technologically, and perhaps even ontologically, from what we are today. To begin, let us consider a scenario in which humanity evolves through natural selection without major disruptions such as extinction events or technological singularities. In this context, biological evolution would likely continue along familiar trajectories. Cranial capacity might increase to accommodate more complex neural processing. Simultaneously, the jaw and dentition may continue to diminish in size, particularly if future diets consist largely of processed or synthetic foods. As physical labor becomes increasingly obsolete, musculature could atrophy across generations, resulting in more gracile, leaner body types. Now consider how the human form might adapt to new environmental conditions. If, for example, humanity begins living underground, perhaps in response to surface-level radiation, climate collapse, or as a strategy for deep space colonization, natural selection might favor larger eyes for low-light vision, enhanced sensitivity to ultraviolet or infrared light, and reduced melanin due to diminished sun exposure. Over millennia, such adaptations could result in profound changes to morphology, including pale skin, thin limbs, and altered sensory capacities. These are precisely the kinds of traits frequently attributed to beings described in UAP and abduction cases, raising compelling questions about whether such reports may reflect evolutionary possibilities rather than pure fiction. However, biological evolution is no longer the only driver of human development. As we move further into the realm of transhumanism, it becomes increasingly likely that humans will begin to direct their own evolution. Technological augmentation, especially through brain-computer interfaces, genetic editing, and sensory enhancement, could lead to profound transformations. Future humans may be able to communicate telepathically via neural links, perceive electromagnetic fields, or access information instantaneously through digital integration. In even more radical scenarios, the biological substrate itself may be transcended. Some futurists envision a post-biological future in which consciousness is uploaded into synthetic bodies or virtual environments. In such a case, traditional human anatomy could become obsolete, replaced by customizable digital avatars or modular robotic forms suited for specific tasks or environments. This shift would not only redefine what it means to be human, but also blur the line between biological and artificial life. A hybrid possibility emerges when we connect these trajectories to recurrent patterns in UFO encounters. The widely reported gray archetype, characterized by large craniums, oversized black eyes, pale skin, and reduced mouths, has been interpreted by some, including Dr. Masters, as a potential evolutionary future for Homo sapiens. If future humans adapted to subterranean or low-light conditions, relied less on verbal communication, and more on neural or telepathic exchange, such traits could logically emerge. In this interpretation, the Greys are not extraterrestrial visitors, but evolved descendants, reflecting a natural progression of our own species. This concept also dovetails with models explored under the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. In those scenarios, similar anatomical traits could evolve not in the future, but in parallel, within hidden or isolated ecosystems deep within Earth, shaped by similar environmental constraints. The question then becomes, which explanation is more plausible? Are these beings future humans, hidden hominins, or could both be true, manifesting in different contexts or converging through parallel evolutionary paths? Several key forces would drive such changes: environmental pressures, artificial selection, cultural shifts, and technological integration. As humanity spreads across different planetary environments or isolated habitats, divergent evolutionary paths could lead to speciation. Simultaneously, advances in gene editing may allow for deliberate modification of offspring, altering physical traits, cognitive abilities, or even lifespan. The increasing symbiosis between humans and artificial intelligence may result in cognitive augmentation so profound that future humans become functionally post-human. Consequently, projecting the future of human evolution does not yield a single answer, but rather a spectrum of possibilities. At one end, we might see biologically recognizable humans with modest adaptations. At the other, fully synthetic or digital beings may exist, traversing space and time without the need for spacecraft or bodies. Between these extremes, there may exist cyborgs, genetically enhanced hybrids, or AI-integrated entities, each representing a unique branch of post-human evolution. These scenarios are compatible not only with the ETM, but also with other origin hypotheses. The diversity of reported UAP entities and craft may suggest the existence of multiple evolved species, not all of which originated in the future. Advanced ancient civilizations, as proposed in the CTH and UTH hypotheses, could have developed similar technologies long ago, giving rise to present-day encounters with beings who are neither alien nor future-born, but long-hidden descendants of Earth's forgotten past. In short, the future of human evolution, if allowed to unfold, may offer a compelling explanation for at least some elements of the UAP phenomenon. Whether those beings are from the distant future, from beneath our feet, or from parallel lines of evolution, they may all share one trait in common: a deep connection to us. Alternate humans, parallel timelines, and interdimensional intelligences. Building on the speculative foundation of the ETM, we enter even more expansive conceptual territory when we consider the many worlds interpretations of quantum mechanics, first introduced by Hugh Everett in the 1950s. According to this interpretation, every quantum event spawns a branching universe in which every possible outcome is realized. Each decision, collapse of a wave function, or quantum interaction produces a divergence, a separate timeline that unfolds with its own internal coherence. This already staggering proposition becomes even more intriguing when we apply it to evolutionary biology. What if, in one of those countless branches, intelligent life evolved along a different trajectory? Perhaps Neanderthals became the dominant hominin species, or the Chicxulub impact never occurred, allowing a species of intelligent dinosaur to rise. From this vantage point, the ETM becomes a subset of a broader interdimensional framework. Rather than encountering future humans from our timeline, we may be witnessing beings who evolved in parallel realities, entities that are alternate humans, not temporally displaced, but ontologically adjacent. In such a framework, time travel as traditionally conceived might not be the operative mechanism at all. Instead, these encounters could represent timeline traversal, a form of interdimensional exchange wherein beings or humans from alternate Earths intersect with our own. This also offers a new dimension to the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, particularly in the sense articulated by John Keel, who proposed that certain UAP-related entities may exist at the margins of our perceptual and physical reality. Traditionally thought of as shape-shifting or metaphysical, ultra-terrestrials may instead be biological intelligences, humanoids from adjacent Earth-like timelines who have developed the means to access neighboring dimensions. The idea of alternate Earth beings also aligns with theoretical physics models that posit the existence of higher dimensions. Some variants of string theory suggest that our universe exists as a membrane within a larger multidimensional space alongside other branes, each representing a parallel universe. In these frameworks, gravity is often considered the only force capable of crossing dimensions. This is noteworthy in light of frequent reports that UAP exhibit unusual gravitational behavior, defying inertia, exhibiting mass-shifting effects, or performing seemingly impossible accelerations. If accurate, such behavior could point not to conventional propulsion, but to mechanisms related to dimensional transition. Now imagine that in one of these adjacent timelines, intelligent life followed a different evolutionary arc. Whether that life form is a hominin cousin, an evolved theropod dinosaur, or an entirely distinct biological lineage, it may have developed technologies that allow it to traverse dimensions rather than space. From its perspective, entering our timeline may be as natural as interplanetary travel is to our science fiction. From our perspective, such a being would appear anomalous, even alien, its behavior and appearance straddling the line between the familiar and the uncanny. This might help explain the paradoxical qualities of many UAP encounters. Craft seem to phase in and out of visibility, behave inconsistently with known physics, or exhibit both mechanical and seemingly metaphysical characteristics. These contradictions may not be errors in perception, but the result of overlapping physical laws, our universe briefly intersecting with the rules of another. Such a model also sheds light on why many reported beings appear anthropocentric, bipedal, humanoid, and behaviorally familiar. If they are alternate humans, evolutionary cousins from parallel Earths, their interest in our biology, culture, or nuclear capabilities may stem not from alien curiosity, but from a deeper relational connection. We may be part of a broader evolutionary family tree, branches separated not by time, but by dimension. This raises a provocative question. Are we being monitored or even subtly influenced by versions of ourselves from alternate timelines? In such a scenario, they would not be future humans in the traditional sense, but reflections of what humanity could have become under different conditions. Their civilization may have emerged millions of years earlier than ours, having avoided extinction events or developed technologies we have yet to imagine. From their vantage point, our present may be a window into their past, a living fossil record. Another more speculative possibility arises from simulation theory. It posits that we may be living in a quantum computational simulation created by advanced future humans, possibly from our own reality. In this view, we are not physical entities, but non-player characters, or NPCs, in a sophisticated ancestor simulation. The UAP occupants might not be visitors in the traditional sense, but system administrators, researchers, or observers entering the simulation to interact with their digital predecessors. Their occasional appearances could be deliberate insertions to test behavioral responses or observe historical conditions firsthand. In such a model, time travel is unnecessary. They already exist in the future and merely engage with their simulated past. From this perspective, we might not exist in the ontological sense, but are instead computational representations of an extinct or prior civilization. Though highly speculative, this interpretation falls broadly under the interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial hypotheses, depending on whether the simulation is treated as a separate ontological domain or a hidden facet of our own. Either way, the visitors would still be future humans, though vastly more advanced and possibly post-biological. Our sense of selfhood, agency, or even reality would be contingent upon their design. The broader takeaway is this: the boundaries between the extratempestrial model, the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, and the interdimensional hypothesis are far more permeable than they may appear. Rather than mutually exclusive, these models may represent different interpretative lenses for the same underlying phenomenon. Time travel, dimensional traversal, simulation theory, all may be attempts to articulate the same experience, encounters with advanced intelligences who are deeply entangled with the human story, yet operating beyond the constraints of conventional space and time. In this light, the UAP phenomenon ceases to be a single-threaded mystery. It may instead be a multidimensional narrative, woven through time, space, and possibility, unfolding one brief visitation at a time. Inconsistencies, diversity, behavior, and the limits of the ETM. Any robust consideration of the ETM must eventually grapple with several persistent inconsistencies, issues that pose significant challenges to its explanatory power. Chief among these is the remarkable diversity of beings reported across UAP and abduction cases, the wide variety of craft observed, the deep historical reach of such encounters, and the seemingly inconsistent behaviors attributed to the entities involved. If the ETM is correct, if at least some of the UAP phenomenon is attributable to future humans visiting their own past, then one pressing question must be asked. Why do the entities and vehicles vary so drastically in appearance and behavior? The reports are not confined to a few variants of human-like forms and standardized craft. Instead, witnesses describe dozens of distinctly different beings and machines. These range from the archetypal greys to tall Nordic-like humanoids to reptilian, insectoid, and even blue or tan-skin entities. Anatomical features vary widely: 3 fingers, 5 fingers, 6, large black eyes, slit pupils, or fully human-like irises. Similarly, the diversity of craft is astonishing. Reports include flying saucers, black triangles, glowing orbs, metallic cigars, cubes within translucent spheres, and craft that appear seamless and organic, or mechanical and modular. Some move with fluid inertia-defined precision, others wobble, emit sound, or exhibit apparent malfunctions. These are not minor stylistic differences. They suggest a staggering disparity in form, function, and perhaps origin. Dr. Masters has suggested that such variation might be explained by temporal divergence. The beings encountered may hail from different periods of our evolutionary future, separated by tens or hundreds of thousands of years. This could account for some differences in physiology or design. After all, we might expect future humans to develop specialized forms adapted for distinct environments or functions, much like how modern humans design tools, vehicles, and suits for different domains. Yet this interpretation begins to strain under the sheer scale of reported diversity. Gradual changes in cranial size or skin tone might be plausible. Entirely different morphologies, such as insectoid mantids or reptilian humanoids, are more difficult to reconcile as future branches of Homo sapiens. Complicating matters further, these varied entities are sometimes reported together, on board the same craft or working in tandem. Such scenarios imply contemporaneous coexistence, not linear evolution. One possible counterargument is that perception itself may be unreliable. Numerous researchers have posited that highly advanced intelligences, especially those capable of manipulating time, might also possess the ability to manipulate human perception. The phenomenon of screen memories, frequently reported in abduction accounts, could suggest a deliberate effort to obscure the true appearance of the entities involved. Whether through telepathic suggestion, electromagnetic influence, neurochemical modulation, or other unknown methods, these beings may be able to project misleading forms or cloak their true identities. Alternatively, the inconsistency may stem not from deception, but from the human brain's attempt to interpret something beyond its comprehension. Perception is never fully objective. It is filtered through culture, expectation, trauma, and archetypal imagery. A being that exists outside normal cognitive categories might be translated by the mind into something more familiar, whether an alien, angel, demon, or folkloric creature. In this light, the wide variation in witness descriptions might reflect psychological limitations rather than actual morphological differences. This interpretive ambiguity, however, does not fully resolve another critical concern: historical reach. Accounts of strange beings and craft do not begin with the 20th century UAP wave. They extend deep into antiquity, from medieval woodcuts and Renaissance-era sky battles to ancient petroglyphs and mythological records. Some of these descriptions bear uncanny resemblance to modern UAP entities. If these are future humans, why have they appeared so consistently and so visibly throughout human history? Are we to assume that time-traveling anthropologists have been conducting covert operations for millennia, with no cumulative effect on the historical timeline? Here, proponents may invoke the Novikov self-consistency principle, which allows for time travel under the condition that it does not produce causal contradictions. In this model, all such visitations would have always been part of history. But even with that framework, the volume and visibility of these encounters, particularly in ancient times, raises questions. If these interventions were purely observational or scientific, the frequency and conspicuousness seem excessive. It challenges the idea of a non-intrusive, passive approach to historical study. Behavioral inconsistency also complicates the ETM. If these are our future descendants, one might expect them to interact with their ancestors, aka us, with empathy, caution, or even reverence. Instead, many abduction reports describe emotionally detached or even hostile encounters. Individuals report invasive medical procedures, forced experimentation, and psychological manipulation. While such behaviors could be rationalized as ethically neutral from a future human perspective, perhaps indicative of post-empathic, hyper-specialized beings, the lack of ethical continuity between them and us weakens the ETM's emotional plausibility. The issue of technological inconsistency adds further complexity. If these visitors represent a singular advanced civilization, we might expect a degree of cohesion in their technological design. Yet UAP reports vary wildly in terms of energy signatures, material construction, and flight capabilities. Some craft appear to use anti-gravity or inertia-negating propulsion. Others emit heat, radiation, or even mechanical sounds. Some vanish without a trace, others allegedly crash and leave behind debris. This lack of technological convergence raises doubts about whether a single civilization, however temporally stratified, could be responsible for all sightings. Taken together, these challenges do not disprove the ETM, but they do constrain its scope. The model remains elegant in how it connects human evolutionary trends to the UAP phenomenon, especially in cases involving humanoid beings and biologically plausible futures. However, it struggles to account for the totality of data gathered over the past century, and indeed over millennia. More plausibly, the ETM may be one piece of a larger, more complex puzzle. It may explain a subset of encounters, those involving humanoid beings, high interest in human biology, and time-related effects. Other cases may reflect different origins entirely, beings from parallel Earths, as suggested by the interdimensional hypothesis, ancient Earth-evolved intelligences, as proposed by the cryptoterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial hypotheses, or extraterrestrial visitors in the classic sense. In the spirit of open inquiry, this complexity should be embraced. Rather than seeking a single unifying theory, it may be more scientifically honest to acknowledge the likelihood of multiple overlapping explanations. The phenomenon appears to reflect a patchwork of intelligences, technologies, and intentions, some of which may indeed be us, and others that remain utterly unfamiliar. In conclusion, where does this leave us? The ETM offers a surprisingly coherent and scientifically grounded framework for interpreting a portion of the phenomenon. It builds on concepts we already understand: that evolution is a continuous process, that technological advancement is accelerating, and that time, as demonstrated by relativity, is not an absolute but a flexible dimension. Unlike the ETH, the ETM does not require life to emerge on distant worlds or travel vast interstellar distances. It only requires that we, Homo sapiens, survive long enough to evolve, master time travel, and become curious enough to look back. To be sure, the model faces substantial challenges. Chief among them is the extraordinary diversity of beings and craft reported across centuries of global testimony. A single evolutionary lineage, even one unfolding across hundreds of thousands of years, struggles to account for such morphological and technological variation. However, as discussed, perception may play a key role in this apparent inconsistency. If these visitors possess the capability to manipulate our sensory processing, whether through telepathic influence, neurochemical modulation, or other cognitive mechanisms, then what we perceive may not reflect what is actually present. Human memory, shaped by expectation, cultural symbolism, and psychological stress, further complicates this picture. What different individuals report may be less about objective observation and more about subjective interpretation. Historical reach also poses a challenge. Encounters with beings resembling modern UAP entities appear in folklore, mythology, and art spanning centuries, even millennia. At first glance, this seems incompatible with the idea of temporally restrained scientific missions by future humans. But if we adopt models of time such as Julian Barbour's Now or the Block universe, where all events in time exist simultaneously, then such encounters may be better understood as manifestations of nonlinear reality. In this framework, time travelers are not disrupting causality, but fulfilling it, in accordance with the Novikov self-consistency principle. Their appearance across time may be less about when they arrive and more about their fixed role within the structure of space-time itself. In the end, the ETM may not account for all aspects of the phenomenon, particularly those involving clearly non-human entities or ultra-exotic technologies. Yet it does offer a logical, biologically plausible, and anthropologically informed explanation for a significant subset of encounters. And importantly, it does so without appealing to concepts that lie entirely beyond the scope of scientific reasoning. The model does not ask us to believe in the supernatural. It simply asks us to extend what we know about evolution, cognition, and physics into the far future. By acknowledging its limitations while offering plausible counterpoints, the ETM remains viable, not as a universal explanation, but as one important thread in a larger, more intricate tapestry. In doing so, it earns a place in the broader conversation about UAP origins and non-human intelligences. Perhaps its most provocative contribution is not what it suggests about the visitors, but what it reflects back to us. The ETM invites us to view the phenomena not as contact with others, but with ourselves, our distant descendants reaching back not to interfere or intervene, but perhaps to witness, to study, or simply to remember. That concludes Part 2 of the NHI Origins miniseries. Join me next time for Part 3, where we'll explore the extraterrestrial hypothesis and examine the strengths and challenges of the idea that we are, in fact, being visited from beyond the stars. Until then, take care, and thanks for listening.